Writer, director, Steve Walsh is clearly passionate about two things. Number one, non-linear storytelling. And number two, big old boobies. Now, he's recently made a movie, this one that we're going to review here, called Kill Her Goats. Now, why do I say he loves those two things in particular? Well, let's look at his previous movie, Muck, which came out in 2015, which I have reviewed on the channel some time ago. Now, this movie, Kill Her Goats, has some similarities to Muck. They're both filmed around kind of Cape Cod. They both feature kind of a cast of young, attractive people. But the interesting thing about Muck, for example, was, that, bear in mind this was the guy's first movie, was he decided to make a trilogy of films, but started with the second part of the trilogy first. So Muck was meant to be the middle part of a planned trilogy of horror films, except part 1 and 3 never came out. So as it stands, it's a really bizarre film because it kind of takes place with the kind of the assumption that there's another film that was going to come out before it. Why make it out of order? I don't know. It was a decision, like I've said, a non-linear decision to try and have some artistic cred, perhaps. But this movie, Kill Her Goats, also has some non-linear aspects to it, although it is a self-contained film. But big old boobies, where does that come in? Well, the other thing Steve Walsh likes is to cast Playboy playmates in his movie, along with a variety of attractive and busty women to kind of fill out his cast. Clearly he casts these people not with their acting ability as a priority, you might say. Anyway, let's talk about Kill Her Goats. So this is kind of a throwback movie in a way to kind of 80s slasher films, and it focuses, at least initially, on three female friends as they are kind of spending some time together in this particular kind of like country house in Cape Cod that one of the women has kind of inherited as kind of a graduation present. So they're there, you know, drinking wine, watching horror movies, all that kind of stuff. However, they are soon menaced by a malicious entity, the Goatman. And this isn't the first time we've seen kind of Goatmen as kind of horror antagonists. Now, this kind of Goatman, or potentially even Goatmen, seems to have bloody intent and kind of wants to hack our beauties up into small pieces. But that might not be the end of their troubles. Now, what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's talk about what I think works in this film. Now, part of Steve Walsh's kind of like modus operandi, part of his signature kind of filmmaking style, is he's very against CGI. In fact, he proudly displays it on his kind of like his promotional materials for his movies. So this one does boast some great practical effects, and there are a few kill scenes here that are genuinely quite kind of like gruesome, bloody and violent. There's not maybe as many as you'd possibly expect. The movie starts out very strong with a kind of an opening kill sequence with a couple in a tent being kind of hunted by this kind of Goatman. And, you know, it sets up the movie in a pretty good stead because you're thinking, oh boy, this is going to be lots of kind of action like this. So on a technical level, I think this movie is proficient in regards to certainly its technical aspects. You know, the gore effects, all done to a pretty good standard. Sound design, all that sort of stuff was quite well handled, and I thought was quite proficiently kind of made, especially for a filmmaker with not a huge amount of kind of experience. The second thing, if you like the female form, with certainly enlarged areas, you'll love this movie because it almost feels like literally half the running time has either got you know, a woman with her boobs hanging out, or at least in kind of skimpy kind of little panties. So there's plenty of female flesh, and as I say, Walsh tends to kind of cast like Playboy playmates, or kind of like models, kind of like busty kind of models in his movie. So yeah, again, it's kind of maybe a throwback to the kind of the 80s kind of style of films where, you know, we had that sort of typical kind of person kind of being cast in films. You've also got a familiar face, well, a familiar form at least, playing our Goatman, although obviously he is kind of behind a kind of a big mask and stuff. But yeah, but you enjoy that kind of particularly a horror legend, you know, once again kind of donning a killer's mask to menace young nubile beauties and things like that. The movie tries to kind of expand upon its initial premise in the kind of the second half of the movie with something else other than kind of a Goatman as a kind of a potential threat. It's kind of like, without giving anything away there's a little bit more to it than just a Goatman or men. Okay, but what doesn't work in this movie? All right. So, as beautiful as these actresses are, you know, and as great as they are to look at and have lots of kind of like eye candy, they are not the best actors. They are not the best actors. Some of the kind of the line delivery here is on the poorer side from some of the cast. Yeah, so the acting isn't great. I also don't think the characters really got a lot of fleshing out, if I'm honest. And they do seem somewhat kind of vapid, kind of like, you know, sort of characters and sort of not really having a lot of meat on their bones in regards to any real depth. Also, how they're introduced, we get some other characters kind of turn up towards the end of the movie, and it's hard to kind of really get particularly kind of invested in them because we haven't really spent any time with them yet. We kind of get a very late introduction to some. So the character work isn't particularly strong. I think the characters are somewhat kind of vapid, almost bordering on likeable to a certain degree. The acting isn't particularly strong either. But here's the biggest problem with this film. I mean, we get that kind of great intro with this kind of a kill early on. But then it's literally an hour before anything else happens in regards to anything kind of horror-wise, apart from one dream sequence. And then, but what we do get is these three girls fanning around in this house. Yes, there's lots of boobs. Lots of boobs, lots of showers, lots of kind of skimpy outfits, but not a lot of story in that first kind of hour. Then we kind of hit the hour mark, and then the kind of the horror stuff starts to kind of happen. But then it kind of almost goes off the rails a little bit in regards to narrative, because we then have this, the story kind of takes a kind of somewhat of a left turn towards the kind of the third act, and you feel like, I'm not quite sure, you know, why this is happening on kind of screen. It doesn't make a massive amounts of narrative sense. And the narrative, unfortunately, is just all over the place. I mean, we get a kind of a bunch of kind of text at the beginning of the movie to kind of set up the film. And then we kind of get a lot of nothingness in that kind of first hour. And then we kind of have this strange kind of character turns in the kind of the last act of the movie. So it's kind of like we get a bunch of kind of like information through text, then a lot of nothing, and then kind of like we're expected to kind of like, you know, follow the story in a logical way. Doesn't seem like it. Although I think the technical aspects are generally pretty good, there are still some elements here that I feel could have used improvement. Some of the lighting here isn't particularly all the best, and the cinematography is a little weak. But by far and away, the biggest issue is the script. Now, Walsh, I think, can handle maybe the directing. He certainly has a style, but he needs to work off someone else's script. Because I feel the writing here, he just isn't skilled enough as a writer to have a compelling narrative with compelling characters. And I think as much as it's kind of pleasant to look at buxom beauties kind of like frolicking around in their underwear or even less, you know, at the same time you want to be able to connect to the characters. So maybe it might be worth diversifying the cast just a scooch. So obviously this is a complete film rather than kind of the part film that was Muck in 2015. But I still think it would kind of genuinely, you know, leave you feeling somewhat unsatisfied unless you only want to watch it for boobs and blood. But there's not all the Goatman attacks are less than you think, unfortunately. They're not the kind of this overarching big bad that you think it's going to be. There are a couple of decent kills, but it's not as kind of like as gory or as kind of much gore as you'd probably expect from that very strong opening. So this could do with a re-edit, in my opinion. But it's, if you just want to watch a kind of a slasher movie with pretty girls, then check it out. But I'll give it a 4 out of 10. It has some elements I feel people will enjoy, but as a story, it's severely lacking, and I just think it's very unfocused. 4 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.